Whoa, oh, sorry about it, 30s, didn't see you there. But now that I have you, let's chat a little bit about what happens after implantation. So, last lesson we talked about the zygote developing into a blastocyst and then later on implanting into the endometrium inside the uterus. So, in the grand scheme of the pregnancy, we're at about day 14. So, you're probably wondering, well, if the blastocyst is embedded in the endometrium and the endometrium is shed during menstruation, what's going to happen here? Well, when implantation occurs and when the blastocyst burrows and implants in the endometrium, it's the outer ring of cells, once again known as the trophoblast, which comes to the rescue. It's going to release a special hormone. It's the human chorionic gonadotropin hormone, which is HCG. HCG is going to be released from the blastocyst itself, specifically the trophoblast. It's going to travel to the corpus luteum and do the exact same thing as LH. So, if you remember from our menstrual cycle video, corpus luteum secretes progesterone and estrogen. Both of those hormones maintain the endometrium. But both of those hormones have a negative feedback effect on LH, which is needed to maintain the corpus luteum. So, with HCG in play, corpus luteum sticks around, estrogen stays high, progesterone stays really high, and you essentially press pause on the menstrual cycle. You essentially stop in the luteal phase. So your endometrium remains, those two hormones remain high, and the corpus luteum sticks around for about the first 2 months. After that, it's the placenta that takes over, but you're still going to have progesterone and estrogen. Now, interestingly enough, when you take a pregnancy test, that's the hormone that you're testing for. So a positive pregnancy test would test for HCG because it would show up in a woman's urine. So that's the actual hormone you're testing for. Now, I did include this image in here, even though it does say over 99% accurate, wouldn't take a pregnancy test from the dollar store. If this is something that you're going to do, I would spend a little bit more and get an actual one. And then of course, you take a couple of these, if you think you're pregnant, you'll go to the doctor to confirm 100% if you are or not. But what these tests actually test for is, does HCG show up in the urine? So, estrogen and progesterone, they will continue to be produced, endometrium stays around, no more menstruation. Like I said, it lasts for about 2 months, HCG and the corpus luteum. Afterwards, the placenta should be fully formed, and the placenta will not only kind of give nutrients and oxygen and different things to the baby, it will also secrete progesterone and estrogen. So the placenta kind of takes over after that first trimester. So let's talk about where your tissues come from. Your organs, your tissues, things like that. It comes through a process of gastrulation. So during the second week, the blastocyst has kind of undergone implantation, and now we're going to start to form various things. So there's going to be a space between the inner cell mass and the trophoblast. This is called the amniotic cavity. We're eventually going to flatten this mass out, and it's going to turn into a disc-shaped structure called an embryotic disc. And out of this embryotic disc, we're going to get a lot of different structures forming, which we'll talk about in a later video. So we're going to start to see the amniotic cavity, the yolk sac forming, the chorions start to form, and then right here, where the inner cell mass would be, we start to get these layers form. We start to get these germ layers. So we see kind of the process of things here. So going from the blastocyst, then we start to see a few more structures start to form, a few more structures, the amnion, the chorion, the yolk sac, and then once again, within the embryo, we have 3 germ layers. And these germ layers are where your organs, your muscles, your tissues, your blood vessels are coming from. So the 3 germ layers we have are the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. And those 3 germ layers will allow you to build essentially a person. Now, these 3 layers, basically the forming of these layers and the development of these layers is through a process called gastrulation. And we now refer to the developing embryo as a gastrula. So we've gone from a zygote to a morula to a blastocyst, and now a gastrula. And once again, these layers are the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. And how we tell the difference between the two, here's how I like to remember it. So M for middle. Your mesoderm is your middle layer. So M for middle. Mesoderm, middle layer. It's the middle layer within this developing embryo. Ecto kind of sounds like exo, I guess. So ecto, exo, that's your outer layer. And then your inner layer is your endoderm. So endoderm being the inner layer, mesoderm the middle layer, and ectoderm the outer layer. Now, when this happens, a series of events will take place here. So when the primary germ layers actually start developing, we start to get differentiation and specialization of our tissues. So we go from different cells to start becoming, oh, well, now that's going to be a heart cell. And now those heart cells are going to group together to make heart tissue, heart muscle. And now that heart tissue and muscle is going to start to form different structures of the heart, the ventricles, the atria, the blood vessels, the aorta. And pretty soon, already at day 50, we have what looks like a heart going on there. So here's day 15, and then in about 35 days, we look like that. So that's pretty cool how quickly it can happen, how quickly your cells will differentiate and start forming nerve cells, heart cells, lung cells, kidney cells, and things like that. So I just want to end here talking about what comes from each layer. So let's start off here with the ectoderm. So we'll start off with the outside layer. Whoops. That'll be a little preview for next lesson. The ectoderm, so that's your outside layer. What comes from the outer primary germ layer? We're gonna have things like your skin, right? Think anything on the outside of your body. So skin, hair, eyelashes, sweat, sweat glands, nails, teeth. This is all gonna be from the ectoderm. You're also going to get your nervous tissue, so you're going to get your nervous system, your neurons, your nerve cells, your brain, your sensory organs, so your eyes, your ears, your tongue, your nose. You're going to get your pituitary gland. All of that is going to come from the ectoderm. Sorry, ectoderm is over here. I'm not sure why it's, ectoderm is right here. So the ectoderm is your outer layer. Then we move on to the mesoderm. And the mesoderm right here is going to be what's below. So we have the dermis of the skin. So the epidermis on the top, below it is the dermis. We then have blood vessels. We have lymph vessels. We have the heart. We have the spleen. We have the kidneys, ureters. We have the adrenal cortex, which makes up part of the adrenal gland, as well as your reproductive organs and I guess not most importantly, but bones, cartilage, and muscle tissue. So all of that is coming from your mesoderm. So you can think of the ectoderm as kind of like the outer covering. We then get below it would be muscle and bone and tissue and tendons and things like that. And then finally, we have the endoderm, which is right over here. This is gonna be the lining of most of your organ systems. So the respiratory tract, the digestive tract, the urinary bladder, most of the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas. We also have the tonsils, the parathyroid gland, the thyroid glands. All of this would come from the inner endoderm, the inner primary germ layer. So key takeaways from this lesson today are you have to know the three primary germ layers, ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, and just generally what comes from each. So for example, if I said, what tissue layer does muscle tissue, blood vessels, and the heart develop from, you would say the mesoderm. So just generally what comes from each layer. So that's all I have for you today. In our next lesson, we're going to be covering the support structures of the embryo. So we're going to talk about the amniotic sac, the umbilical cord, the placenta, the yolk sac, things like that. So things that develop to actually support the growing embryo. So have a nice day, and we'll chat soon.